All right. Our next speaker is Katerina Fragkiadaki. She is an associate professor of computer science in the machine learning department at CMU, where her research focuses on enabling machines to understand and interpret video content. And prior to joining CMU, Katerina was a postdoc at UC Berkeley, working with Jitendra Malik and at Google Research in Mountain View. And she completed her PhD in computer science at UPenn, at the GRASP Lab, and under the supervision of Tianbo Shi, after studying at the National Technical University of Athens. And we're very pleased to have her after the mic works out.
Right, I got it.
Hopefully.
Don't worry. Something like that, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Right.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy to share our recent work with you, the excellent topic of the workshop. Okay, so what we'll discuss is 3D spatial reasoning and simulation with generative models for robot manipulation. There are three main ways to supervise robots, right? One that was not that much in this CoRL, but I'm pretty sure is going to take over. CoRL 25, 26, 27 is visual imitation, watching videos and doing, okay? A big part for learning manipulation in this workshop is learning from demonstrations with actions. Okay, you have observations and the action sequences, and then essentially you do some sort of behavior cloning. And then the last part, which it works already very well for locomotion, mostly for locomotion and some local manipulation. Let's say tasks is learn in simulation, scale up with reinforcement learning and core combination of imitation and reinforcement learning, and then transfer in the real world. So yes, so we have seen a lot of works. In fact, the best paper work in this workshop is also a big foundational model of vision and language trained with lots and lots of kinesthetic demonstrations, essentially sequence of observations and actions with big transformers, end-to-end mapping of image and language to actions through the action discretization or through diffusion, let's say the action decoders. And one thing that we tried to explore in a work that actually is part of this workshop, it showed up the first day, is how much can 3D spatial reasoning help in robot manipulation? Can we, essentially learn manipulation skills with less data if we reason directly in 3D? So the method that I wanted to discuss with you first is a 3D diffuser actor. It's a combination of 3D scene representations and diffusion models for robot manipulation. So what you can see here is, and I want to walk you through the architecture, is essentially we can perceive the scene with RGB-D cameras, and we build 3D feature clouds, which we use to denoise essentially 3D rotations and translations for the robots and effector. So the first part is essentially the sensing. You have an RGB-D camera. The RGB image can be featurized with a standard image encoder. We use CLIP, but we can use other pre-trained backbones, and we don't fine-tune it in this work. Then the depth map, the sense depth map, along with the camera, essentially extrinsics, is used to lift those features. Every 2D patch has a feature vector, so we lift those features to 3D. So now instead of having a 2D feature map, width by height by number of channels, we have a 3D feature cloud, right? A graph essentially of little tokens, where every token has an appearance vector of the C channels coming out from our 2D backbone and 3 coordinates X, Y, Z. So once you convert your observation into this feature cloud format, one benefit you have is that integration of different viewpoints is effortless. You don't need learning. Okay, of course, you can pass your different views into a transformer or some other methodology to fuse them, but in this way, they're essentially aggregated in a geometry aware way if your cameras are calibrated. Okay, so the relative rotations and translations. You can have more than one views, or you can just have one view. So you build your 3D feature cloud. And then, because we want to use, of course, diffusion models to handle multimodality, right? In imitation learning, every demonstrator has a very different way of doing the task. And, so that's why diffusion models give such an enormous push in imitation learning for robotics, that we have essentially a denoising head that takes the feature cloud and takes also a language input, open the drawer, and takes also a noised trajectory or key pose of the robot's end effector, essentially noisy rotations and translations at every time step, and fuses them to predict back the noise. And the benefit of this 3D architecture is that essentially, given your current idea of where your future end effector trajectory would be, this is essentially rendered in the scene, right? So the trajectory tokens are together with the visual tokens, and they are fused jointly with attentions. And these attentions are relative attentions. Essentially, relative attentions means that the similarity depends, of course, on how much the appearance vectors match, and also on the offset, the relative offset between two tokens, not on their absolute 3D coordinates. This is very important because the coordinate system of those XYZs is completely arbitrary. Okay, so where you decide to put your XYZ, center of your coordinate system, and we don't want the results to change based on the change of this coordinate system. So we have essentially translation equivariance built in this architecture. So what you do now at test time is you sample from the standard normal distribution, random noise, and you iterative denoise this trajectory or key pose for some benchmark, which will predict trajectories. From other benchmarks, we predict a target key pose, and then we use motion planners to go there. And you iterate and get your final trajectory out. So how is this architecture different than 2D diffusion policy? She runs a seminal work, like one of the very first papers that used generative models to handle multimodality for learning policies, robot policies. The only difference is that we build a 3D feature cloud instead of using, one or more views in 2D. Yes, and this makes a big difference once you have a limited number of demonstrations. Now, as demonstration goes to infinity, nothing matters, right? You can just do any template matching would work. Now, interestingly enough, there is another paper that showed up in RSS 24, which is called 3D diffusion policy. So, I mean, we took that paper. I mean, there's no, like, as mostly done in robotics papers, you avoid benchmarks. So the authors did not benchmark their work, but we download the code because they actually wrote something bad about our paper. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother to do that because quite a bit of work. So we download their code and we test it on a Calvin benchmark, and actually it didn't perform well. So then the reason we think this is the case is because the essential part is not 3D and is not diffusion. I mean, diffusion is, without diffusion, nothing works. But it is this joint fusion on that 3D feature space. 3D diffusion policy instead takes a point cloud and condenses it into one D vector, and then there is cross attentions between that single scene vector and the action you want to perform. The problem with this is that it completely kills locality of computation. Locality of computation is a very important principle for generalization. This means your gripper is here, your scene changes there, no problem, because it doesn't going to influence the attentions on the part of the scene that you care about. So locality of computation, in fact, there is another great paper in this workshop, again, with locality of computation, not on this workshop, on this conference, with locality of computation in the title. So we visualize here some samples from our model. You sample 60 trajectories, and you see that, sometimes you have multiple modes. And this is a better result, a better visualization to see this multimodality. Here, our graduate student collected demonstrations for putting grapes in the bowl. And sometimes he picked up the green grape, and sometimes the black, and sometimes the dark red grape. And that's why you see those three modes. So all 60 samples are concentrated around those three modes. And you see that we don't hallucinate any modes, and we don't drop modes, right? That's the beauty of diffusion models. And of course, diffusion models are getting better and better, and with flow models and so on, and it's extremely exciting. So this model does well on two benchmarks, Calvin and RL bench. Yes, so which is important because usually works either is going to evaluate on RL bench, which is a very geometry like driven benchmark. All methods on RL bench. I mean, RL bench currently is using multiple views, which is difficult for a mobile robot to use multiple views looking towards the scene. I mean, you can have multiple cameras looking outwards, but it's hard to have multiple cameras looking inwards and moving around at the same time. I mean, you need to have the viewing sphere moving with you. It is difficult. And also, RL bench predicts key poses, which means, not a trajectory, but rather a key pose, and then he has motion planner to go there. Calvin doesn't do that. There's no motion planner, so you need to predict the trajectory directly. Another very important and very important detail is that here you can predict your 3D, we do task space control, right? So you predict your key pose on the robot base, at the coordinate system at the robot base. There, this doesn't work. You need to use the end effector coordinate system, which translates and orients with your gripper. And yeah, so we did some ablations to understand what exactly is important in performance. So we went from a 3D diffuser actor to a 2D diffuser actor, and now there are two versions of this 2D diffusion, right? So one is the one that condenses the scene into anti-vector, and one that does not condense the scene, and it just leaves it around as a 2D feature match. And both of them have a lower performance. Now, another thing we did is we went from relative attentions to absolute attentions, and again, you lose 10 points. There may be a way to get around this by using insane amount of translation augmentations. Yes. And the important thing about this 3D is not that you need multiple views. In fact, things work really well from a single camera. The important thing is this that I told you, that you render and your gripper essentially during this iterative denoising in your 3D visual tokens, and you contextualize it in this 3D aware way, okay? Now, the question is, here are some results from RL bench. The question is, are these 3D inductive bias important as the amount of data scales? And to be honest, I'm not sure. We're trying to do exactly that, like to throw really insane amount of data on this 3D vision aware language condition policy. So it becomes a foundational policy. Once you put tons of data, you put the pre-trained language, but going became very foundational. But one problem on scaling the data for those 3D policies is just that we cannot find essentially the calibration is difficult, right? So it's hard to find large, like the bridge data or open embodiment data, the calibration is not there, the robot's calibration. So basically what we need to do is we take those videos and ourselves, much like a human does it, or lift them to some 3D, and that 3D doesn't need to be very metric, and then we hope that we'll be able to use them in this way, okay? Yeah, another thing that I want to mention regarding are 3D inductive bias important or not is the following. You can totally imagine you have little data, then you train a policy with more inductive bias that kind of tries to generalize more. Then in this way, essentially you get more data, just by bootstrapping, and you can totally, distill your extra training data into a policy that doesn't have inductive bias, that is faster to learn and so on, faster to train, faster to do inference, so on. So this is totally a legit way of essentially densifying your data, as opposed to going from, whatever demonstrations humans given me in, a policy that actually, doesn't generalize very well. So this is just an extension of diffuser actor to bimanual tasks. Yeah, so this one is on the PERAC2 benchmark, like without spending any time, as you see, we're at the top of the benchmark. This is a recent benchmark, like July 2024 came out. And right now we're also got a, this mobile Aloha robot, because it's very easy to, give kinesthetic demonstrations, and we are applying the same thing in the real world. Yeah. Now, of course, spatial reasoning is not going to, without data, nothing is there. So the question is, how do we really can scale up robot data? Of course, collecting more kinesthetic demonstrations would be great. Figuring out, exploration in the real world is also great. Figuring out visual limitation is for sure the way to go, okay? But this is not what we'll discuss now. what we'll discuss next is what about simulation? How can we scale up data in simulation instead? Okay, and take advantage of simulation. We have a method that showed up in ICRA 2023, and we say, can we use generative models of language and vision to, scale up simulation tasks, assets, environments, and so on. So the way it works is it has three parts. I'll really briefly discuss. We generate assets from 2D images to make 3D meshes. We ask language models to give us task specification and reward functions in Python, which we then optimize with reinforcement learning, essentially PPO. 2023 was a particularly exciting year. The year where we were able to do in the wild 2D to 3D lifting. Any 2D image now can be lifted to 3D by essentially taking a differentiable 3D representation, projecting it down, computing the projection error with the actual image that you see, projecting it in other viewpoints, and then put generative priors. Essentially, you want your rendered images to have high likelihood under your pre-trained image generative model. And here we're using a view condition generative model, the very famous 0 to 3D model. And first, you can train a nerf, and then you can also, convert it to a mesh and train also a differentiable tetrahedral section. And that's it. This is your asset. So you can lift all assets to 3D now, right? Any piece, any type of a vegetable that you cut, like piece of vegetable, whole vegetable, etc. We were wanted to build supposedly a simulation for food for a Sony project. We had a gastronomy project, and we couldn't do it up till 2023, where we were able to do this fitting of differentiable 3D models using the projection error and generative priors from diffusion models, from image diffusion models. And 3D geometry is not enough. You also need physics, and you need size, because 2D images don't have size of the objects. But you ask language models. Also, tell me please the size of the pumpkin. What density shall I put? What type of material is made of? And give me all the numbers that I need to put in my simulator. And they do give extremely plausible results. Now, we don't need to get stuck on those language models. Once we start building our own databases, let's say, of materials, and we have a nice zucchini and a nice pumpkin and a nice knife, etc. Then we can just ask, does it feel more like a knife, or does it feel more like a pumpkin, right? So you can bootstrap yourself. Not that I have found a lot of mistakes on the LLM predictions, but we can totally imagine that, yeah, we can bootstrap. And then now this is not enough. We have assets. Now we need to specify tasks to solve and reward functions. Okay. And one way that we hope to do that is again to ask language models. So the prompt is very short, and it fits all in this slide, because there is this black magic on the prompt. So this prompt is actually quite simple. First, you need to tell to the language model what the simulation contains, what assets and what are their parts. Then you need to say what is the API to interact with the simulator to get the locations of different parts and their states. And then you need to say, tell me now, this is my scene. I told you what's my scene. List for me a set. So this is the example that we also give it one example of what's supposed to do. Give me a list of meaningful tasks. And here it says, oh, you have a microwave, so it makes sense to open the microwave, place a cup in the microwave. And this task has also subtasks. So it also does the temporal decomposition for you, which is extremely important for reinforcement learning. And then once you have the temporal decomposition, the example continues and tells it how to, code up reward functions. For example, approach the microwave door and so on and so forth. And then you also describe now a test environment that is very different, has a sanitizer, and the language model can predict the tasks, subtasks, and reward functions, which now you can optimize with reinforcement learning. And the big lesson from this work is that this task decomposition, the temporal task decomposition, was actually extremely important for RL to work. Okay, you can see here, we have this put the green pepper in the left door of the refrigerator and so on. And, you need to open the left door, pick up the green pepper. These are the different tasks with the corresponding reward functions, and optimizing them in sequence one by one is able to achieve the task. While if you, have one complex reward, and you just then you cannot, without this temporal decomposition, you will not be able to essentially achieve the task without guiding PPO anymore. Now, I don't think this is the only way to guide PPO. I think you can totally do visual imitation and guide it. And in fact, there are many works in this, conference, and we're working on this as well. This one does not use any visual guidance. It's all a language model guidance, okay? But for sure, there is a lot of world knowledge that we can exploit. Having said that, for some tasks, for example, pouring, we were not able to get it with language models. It's much more natural. Just watch a demonstration of pouring, just lift it to 3D, put there some goals and rewards, and try to achieve it. It makes way more sense. So in any case, with this method, we were able to scale up demonstrations and collect all this data completely autonomously. And then we did this again with more diverse tasks, also for locomotion, with different robot morphologies, some mobile robots, some just static, some mobile manipulators, and so on, better renderers as well. And we think that this is one plausible way to scale up simulation. Of course, it's not just asking language models, is going from video to, and I'm going to show you in a second. So one such work. Now, one bottleneck using simulation is simulators. There are fantastic simulators, and they're actually getting better by the day. But one, let's say, downside is the interface. This is how much you need to code to add one Franka model in Isaac Gym. And Isaac Sim is also worse. So this makes it very difficult to build up scenes and really create things in these simulation environments. So Xian Zhu, in my lab, along with amazing, incredible collaborators across multiple universities, have been working on trying to put out a new simulator. So he started with a fluid lab, essentially just to using particle simulators to model fluids. And now they are building this simulator, which is supposed to come out in a couple of weeks, Genesis. Genesis can simulate rigid, liquid, gas, deformable objects, thin objects, granular objects, all types of objects. They have, coded up all different physics solvers. And it's written completely, it doesn't use any NVIDIA physics engine and so on. It is written from the ground up in Tai Chi, which is a GPU parallelizable programming language, came out in 2018. They have two beautiful renderers. So the visuals from those renderers were used in the previous work, which you can change only with one line of code. And it is extremely fast. Now, for the particle part, it's only twice fast the previous simulator, but for the piecewise rigid part, it is much faster than, Mujoko, which is the most, of course, there is Drake, which is the most accurate physics simulator, with particularly slow. Mujoko is what many people use for reinforcement learning. Genesis is much faster, okay? And the reason for this is the collision checking algorithm, which has been, parallelized in a better way. And the assets are represented using sign distance fields, and the GJK here has much more, much more accelerated, let's say, implementation. And essentially, all this is just extremely incredible engineering and great collaboration between Xian's and the team and Tai Chi developers. And these are some visuals, and we've already trained our first quadrupeds on this simulator, and they're working. And of course, we want to train all other robots there. Now, maybe the last thing I want to say is that yes, we very much believe in this paradigm of real or large-scale simulation. We don't think language models is a way to build simulators, although Xian is extremely excited about it. We also believe a lot in videos and understanding videos, lifting videos to 3D, and then porting those assets in, let's say, in these simulation environments. And these are things that we're working on. And we think the tools are mature, all right? All these generative priors are there and working, and things are mature for this to happen. So the takeaways is the 3D inductive biases help generalization. That generative simulation, this combination of generative models and simulation environments, can generate a lot of training data for manipulation. And Xian and his collaborators are working towards better and faster simulators that I really hope that you find useful and helpful. Thank you very much. Yes.
Is 3D construction also nice in 3D bias? It's like the next big thing to have like dynamic 3D reconstructed scenes or?
Yeah, a very good question. So I think so we are not using so we are using the features from the image, which is what every RGB policy uses, and then we take that feature vector and we just shoot it in a 3D space. So we don't try to complete or anything, or we don't try to fine-grain point cloud. It's actually a feature cloud. Do you see? So it's not points, it's features. Now, whether I believe in 3D reconstruction, absolutely, but I mostly believe in making 3D reconstructions in simulation worlds, dumping them in simulation and simulating them and get data from there. I think if you just want to feed an encoder to your policy, it can just totally be such a 3D feature field. And I think there is a confusion because many people talk about like, oh, you need to move your camera all around to capture the whole scene. And totally, absolutely not. The same way 2D policies can work from a single view, and that's totally fine. 3D policies can also work from a single view. The only difference is that, maybe the gripper and the scene are mostly more explicitly, fused in that world 3D space. Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes. The base was moving because it was a mobile. Yes, but so this, yes, I mean, some of them are static manipulators, some are mobile, and so on. Yes. Other questions?
We would have time for one more, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need temporal consistency at every time step, much like a 2D policy at every time step takes an image and then spits out the action. Here, we just, in every time step, we take an image, we take the depth map, we just shoot some features to 3D, which is super approximate, right? Because every patch is pretty fat, so it shoots somewhere in 3D space, and that's it. That's all that happens. It's very similar to 2D policies, but I think because the network doesn't need to figure out how to coordinate 2D and 3D, you just need less training data to learn the mapping. Okay, yeah, yes, this is it. Now, yeah, if you want to learn now world models and how deformables deform and how they move, etc., then of course you need to figure out the 3D point tracking of those, which is much harder problem as opposed to just featureizing and lifting to 3D. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so maybe one last round of applause.